Hello, everybody. My name is Peng. I'm one of the co-chairs for this session. And we'll be talking about, first of all, let me welcome you all to join this session, continue the discussion we started at the Pre-ESIP workshop. Let me start here. If you have not done so in the notes and under the session notes, yes, I have seen people started already. So under the welcome and roll calls, please put your name, affiliation, and if you don't mind, your email address. And after a short roll calls, and I will talk a little bit about the Pre-ESIP workshop and some of the fun facts, and followed by the 3 invited presentations from the workshop participants, and followed by a quick, a short part of Q&A session. And after that, I will describe a little bit more in more detail preliminary outcomes of the workshop, and followed by a 20 minutes open discussions and questions. Then we'll have a 5 minutes, 3 takeaways that will be led by David. And I would outline the path forward and closing reminders. So where you guys are, enter your information, and I will talk a little bit about the workshop. So the initial discussion actually started in September last year when I visited representing the ESIP Information Quality Cluster at the Barcelona Supercomputing. And we have worked with ESIP to get their sponsorship and commitment for a whole day pre-ESIP workshop. And the announcement was made to prospective collaborators along with invitation to present and collaborate, participate. As you all know, it has turned virtual, and on Monday, July 13th, we had a virtual all-day pre-ESIP workshop with 2 live sessions and additional online resources for online and offline discussion and between sessions. The goals of the workshop are to explore the multi-dimensions of data and information quality, and to explore challenges, needs, and current approaches via the invited invitations and breakout room discussions, and in order to set foundation to kick off the development of community guidelines. The workshop is, as mentioned earlier, is co-organized by ESIP Information Quality Cluster and the Barcelona Supercomputing Center. And it's the team, data quality evaluation and control team for Copernicus Data Store. And it is sponsored by ESIP. We have 79 pre-registered from ESIP community and invited national, international domain expert on datasets qualities from 9 countries. And the majority of the registered are from US, as you can see from this chart. 80% pre-registered people have indicated that they were interested in attending. And for the 2 live sessions, the first session we had over 45 attendees, and the second session we have about 25 attendees. Prior to this workshop, and our Australia and New Zealand counterparts, they actually had another mini workshop, 57 registered and 27 participate. The outcome of that mini workshop were summarized and presented at the workshop. So we have about 12 talks by 14 presenters, and they were selected to representing national and international satellite data programs and data archives and service centers, as well as data publishers. And the idea is to have a sampling of challenges and needs and approaches in various different organizations and associated with different roles, to give attendee overall review about complexity and multi-dimensional data set quality informations, and that to set a solid foundation for developing the guidelines. And for this session, to continue the discussions and the exploration, we have invited 3 participants of the workshop, Mary, Sarah, and Sophie, to give a presentation about the challenges and some of the approaches they use in their organization. I'm going to see. Yaxin, are you there?
Yes, hi Peng, I'm here. I'm ready to share my screen.
Perfect. I'm going to stop sharing. You go ahead.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Great. Peng, shall we move forward with the presentations?
Yes, please.
Great. So our first presentation today is by Marie Dravelin from Mercator Ocean International. And Marie, here you go.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone.
You need me to move to the next slide.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much for inviting me to this pre-ESIP workshop and the ESIP meeting, summer meeting. It was very interesting for me. I'm a newcomer in this community. So next, please, I'm going to introduce, next slide, please. Yeah, the Copernicus program, as you may know, is the European Commission Earth Observation Program. It has a satellite component, the space component based on the family of satellites called Sentinel, and 30 other contributing missions from the international community of Earth observation. It also has an in-situ component and services, thematic services based on these observations, among which there is a marine environment monitoring service, which is coordinated by Mercator Ocean. Next slide, please. There are 2 ways to access the data, either via the services themselves on their web portals or on DIAS platforms. 5 are developed and 1, Wikio, is developed jointly by EUMETSAT, ECMWF, and Mercator Ocean. Next slide, please. So the Copernicus Marine Service has an online catalog, and it has more than 170 different products, and all scientifically qualified. We use the NetCDF format, and we follow FAIR principle as much as possible. It is open and free. And in addition to ocean data products, numerical products, we also develop added value information such as ocean monitoring indicators and also an ocean state report, which is updated each year. Next slide, please. The data we deliver is based on 3 different sources of data from 43 different producers. So in situ observations and satellite observations, as I said, but also model products. The coverage is global, but there are specific products for the European seas, which are higher resolution or specifically tuned. We go back in time in the 1990s, and we have reanalysis, model reanalysis, but also reprocessed observations, real-time products, and forecasts up to 10 days. Next slide, please. On the catalog, there are more than 14 marine parameters. For the blue ocean, the ocean circulation and temperature and salinity, the green ocean, biogeochemistry, and also the white ocean, sea ice, and the wind at the surface of the ocean. Next, please. So to deal with product quality, we are relying on a team's work. So what we call the Product Quality Working Group is a community of 40 people working in production centers of the Copernicus Marine Center, Copernicus Marine Service, sorry. We meet once a year and we agree on the validation standards, the verification procedures we are using. We are discussing the reference documentation and the central quality website that we are developing. And also we organize regular exchanges on these topics, but also the new reference observations that are coming in, the scientific issues that we have in common. And this group is coordinated also by Mercator Ocean. Next slide, please. So we all use a common approach, a validation approach with several following the stages of the life cycle of an oceanography product. So we have validation in support of the service desk to answer feedback from the users. We have validation in support of the evolution of the systems, of the production systems. We have a pre-operational qualification phase during which we issue reference documentation on the validation. We have routine verification, which is part of the production chain. And we have delayed time verification, delayed time qualification, which is used to produce updates of the quality information. And also it's the good time to participate to cross-cutting activities. So next, please. The user feedback is very important in Copernicus services, and we collect it during during trainings, via service desks, and also, sorry, it was a little bit too quick, but whatever, it's okay, so you got my point. User feedback is very important. So next, please. And we use a series of metrics, one set of metrics that is the same through the whole process, and which was defined by the Ocean Predict community. And there are different type of metrics to assess the consistency, representativeness, the robustness, and the accuracy. And from the class 4 metrics, the last type, the accuracy metrics, we derive area average score. Sorry, it's going too quick. Area average scores, which are monitored, and we call estimated accuracy numbers. Everything is published in papers or in internal reports. So next, please. Maybe, okay. So we can also see that as a scientific quality assurance loop that we have in the service. And so we start from the user's feedback, and we, at the stage of the pre-operational qualification, we issue the reference documentation, which is available online next to the product itself. And then at the delayed time verification stage, we can update regularly the EANs, the estimated accuracy number, that are published on the website. Next, please. So what are the user feedback on the type of information we deliver on the quality of our products? So the more frequent feedback we get are the following. So it is to have access to more synthetic overview of product quality for each product in order to be able to choose between products, to have fit for purpose information, in fact. So they also ask that we produce user-friendly scores and add the number of good observations, to explain more why some products are less validated than others, to add technical lectures online, to add more information on the quality flags, more explanations. And also a very frequent question is about the production of high resolution error estimates and to provide the error estimates as data sets. So this is something we are trying to answer, and by the evolution of our documentation in 2021 and our website for the first points. And we're also continuously improving the training material, and we're also trying to work on these error estimates that we could provide in the future as a data set. And of course, they will have to follow FAIR principle. And this is very important for us to have this discussion with the community to know how to do this in a consistent way. Next, please. So this is how we are, what we are doing currently on the evolution of our documentation. We are working on a high-level quality assessment table that is very much similar to the application performance matrix that was shown by UMedSat during the workshop, during the Pre-ESIP workshop. So it's really to give fit-for-purpose information, in addition to scientific quality overview that we will provide per variable in the future. And we will also continue to work on reference documents that are available online for the users. So thank you. I think next slide is to say thank you. And that was all I was going to say today.
Thank you, Marie. Apologize, I noticed that sometimes the slides moved by itself.
Yeah, I understand that. I don't worry. Maybe it's my presentation that was, I don't know, maybe I ticked the wrong box in my presentation. So it's not your fault, I understand.
Thanks.
But it's okay.
So just a reminder for everyone, if you have any questions for presenters, feel free to put your questions or comments into the Zoom chat window or directly into our Google Doc. So our next presentation is from Sarah Champion from North Carolina State University, and the title is Information Quality and the National Climate Assessment. Go ahead, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Just want to make sure you can hear me first.
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll go ahead then. So good morning. I am Sarah Champion. I'm the data architect for the National Climate Assessment. And today I'm going to be talking about how we approach information quality. Next slide, please. To begin, I'm going to give an overview of the National Climate Assessment in case anyone here is unfamiliar. And then I'm going to discuss how we approach information quality through a series of legal mandates, the challenges associated with meeting those mandates, and then what tools and practices we use to ensure our compliance. Next slide. So the National Climate Assessment, or NCA for short, is mandated by the Global Change Research Act of 1990, which says that every 4 years, our government will produce a state of the science assessment of climate impacts across US sectors and regions with the purpose of informing decision and policymakers along with the general public. These national reports date back to the year 2000, and we've produced 4 to date. The establishment of the sustained assessment process in 2014 provided a mechanism to also produce interim, smaller, and more topically focused assessments, which will also serve as foundational content into the next national assessment. Next slide, please. So how does the NCA address, provide, and ensure the information quality of these reports? Well, in short, by law. We are legally mandated to ensure that the assessment data and science are transparent, accessible, and reproducible. These requirements are summarized here through a lineage of mandates dating back to the President's Climate Action Plan. And beneath each of these pieces of legislation, I provided a very brief summary statement as to what is being mandated in each. Next, please. So up through the most recent assessment, the 4th assessment released in 2018, we've been required to and have met the mandates up through the Information Quality Act and highly influential scientific assessments. Next, please. With future assessments, we will also be required to meet the newly passed requirements outlined by the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act, or the Evidence Act for short, as well as those in the updated Information Quality Act, which collectively state that in addition to the original requirements, we must also now provide the same level of transparency, accessibility, and reproducibility to the underlying information, or the metadata and the software code. And oh, by the way, they must also be provided by open access, distributed under an open license, and distributed in a machine readable format. Next, please. And as we're all here to discuss, meeting these requirements certainly has a robust set of challenges, which now also includes addressing open access and licensing for significant amounts of content across multiple use cases, which in theory may each have their own intellectual property details and varying methods for requesting and obtaining permission and terms of use. So for example, in both of the volumes for the fourth assessment, we had nearly 2,000 pages of text, nearly 1,000 individual figure panels contributed by 152 different cited data sets, a variety of sources, methods, and tools, contributed by more than 350 authors with affiliations spanning across 15 federal departments, 5 national labs, 20 research institutions and nonprofits, 3 government contract companies, 28 local government organizations, and 65 different universities. So in short, it's no small challenge. Next slide, please. So how have we historically tackled these challenges? Well, for both the third and the fourth assessments, we work directly with assessment authors and contributors to collect the underlying figure source and dataset metadata by way of an online author survey. These surveys are organized so that the collected input ensures our information quality mandates are met. Here I have displayed a figure from the fourth assessment. This one is one of our prize examples for demonstrating information quality because it's a complex figure with not only a robust suite of information, but it's representative of both the breadth and magnitude of information that we may collect for any assessment figure. This is a 13-panel figure, and each panel has its own collected metadata. Now, this figure also happens to be the second most downloaded figure in the entire fourth assessment and the most downloaded metadata of any figure across the entire report. And it is available from an interactive metadata viewer on the report website. Now, the popularity of such a complex figure not only demonstrates the value of meeting these legal mandates, but because people are showing us that they're using it far and wide, we now know that providing a level of information quality is also a best practice. And to continue to meet the needs of our end users, we need to continue to ensure their access, understanding, and trust for all of our assessment information. Next slide, please. So in realizing this, with the passing of these new mandates, we immediately jumped on revising our collection tools to now also collect details about data set and software licensing, as well as the actual software code. Next slide, please. So the online survey is a large piece of our tools and practices, but the success of this survey will be strengthened by the approach that we are now taking, which is in partnership with NOAA General Counsel, where we have co-authored legal language for the Federal Register notices, incorporated legal reviews into our assessment information collection, and revised the set of questions in our surveys to ensure that we're not only meeting these letters of the law, but also serving the interests of our end users, which come to find out also include these federal government attorneys who are responsible for addressing FOIA requests and any lawsuits about assessment processes and content. So this partnership will be a win-win. Next slide, please. So this partnership and the vision for complete assessment information quality is rooted in the federal data strategy, where the data, and now also the underlying information, are regarded as federal strategic assets. And as underscored here by NOAA's data strategy, the assessment takes its role seriously to share data as openly and widely as possible so that these assets can be capitalized upon by all audiences. Next slide, please. And this vision extends beyond the federal government and any information quality mandates, noting that the scientific research and academic publishing communities are adopting similar visions, and requirements, in part motivated by a significant and rapid shift towards a very digital-centric platform. This offers advantages, I imagine, which are heavily realized in our current virtual worlds amidst COVID-19 quarantines, where it is vitally important that we no longer have to travel to get our hands on information. Next slide. However, this is still an emerging shift. In the past, an open access journal was relatively hard to come by, but as of last year, we now have nearly 3 times as many open access journals, and in conjunction with these publications, broader access to the underlying data, which is an evolving requirement just to publish with these types of journals. The shift is not just to the digital domain, there's also been a shift in the thinking behind access itself. Transparency, openness, and reproducibility are readily recognized as vital features of science, as quoted here. And there is no better example of the value and utility of this shift than the world in which we all now suddenly find ourselves. Recently, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, or OSTP, worked across the federal government to rapidly provide open access to data pertinent to studying the coronavirus by releasing what is known as the COVID-19 Open Research Dataset. This dataset contains 35,000 scholarly papers on COVID-19 and other coronaviruses. And as a direct result of the open access of this dataset, in the first week of July alone, a whopping 2,200 COVID papers were submitted for publication. Next slide, please.
1 minute.
The recent and rapid movement behind current and timely COVID research is also a perfect example of the concept that with data, you provide information. With information, you can reach understanding. And with understanding, you can take action. This is foundational motivation behind the assessment information quality as well. Yes, we are legally required to ensure a level of information quality with these assessments, but as stewards of this information and professionals in the climate science and earth science domains, we also wholeheartedly believe in sharing this information for the greater good of our planet. Next slide. So in summary, yes, we are mandated to ensure data assets are transparent, accessible, reproducible, and now also open. Historically, we've always maintained the opinion that data are a strategic asset, and we will continue our standard of thorough and complete documentation because regardless of motivation, quality information is rooted in the concepts of innovation and collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
My pleasure.
So we'll leave the questions after all the presentations. Now we are moving to our third presentation for today. And our third presentation is, let me show the screen. Okay, the third presentation is from Sophie Ho from USGS. Go ahead, Sophie.
I need to unmute myself first. Hi, Yashing. Hi, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to present to the group today. So technically, I am with Apogee Engineering. I am a contractor to the USGS, but I am a data and usability analyst. So I am collaborating on this project with USGS. Next slide, please. During this presentation, there are 3 different areas that I would like to share with you, as you can see on the slide. But since the presentation is only going to be 8 minutes long, I would like to share with you the key takeaway first. Next slide, please. And the key takeaway is that so far during our fair assessment project process, we've come to understand that in order to make FAIR actionable, it is really helpful to first localize the FAIR principles. FAIR principles are new, and in many cases still need to, there's still a need to provide examples and use cases and guidelines to how to apply these different principles. So we find that it had been really helpful to consider the USGS context first and think about how FAIR can be relevant to the USGS environment. But of course, we want to converge with the community. We want to contribute to the best practices so that FAIR principles can grow. And that's why communicating with the community through the pre-workshop as well as presenting here has been really helpful for us. Next slide, please. But first, now that we have seen the takeaway, I'd like to share with you how we got to that understanding. And so I would like to share with you a little bit about the background information and the key objectives of this FAIR assessment project that I'm working on with USGS. Next slide, please. The FAIR assessment project is actually a pilot program that is currently still in progress. And so what you're seeing is what we have experienced so far. And of course, at the end of the process, we would love to provide additional follow-ups for the community. But I just want to say that to give you a heads up in terms of where we are in our project status. And the reason why it's a pilot is because in case you aren't already familiar with USGS, USGS engages in a lot of different research areas. And we really want, if we want to understand the maturity of the USGS data as a whole, which is the overall goal of this pilot program, we can't do that in one go. So we've decided to basically create a small portion of the effort and using the 3 objectives that I'm showing on the slide to understand how we can actually take the best recommendations from the community, go through a little bit of testing process with the USGS data, and then be able to come up with a strategy and potential actions that we can then apply to the larger body of the USGS data. Next slide, please. And so since we are doing this as a pilot program, there are a lot of different considerations that we need to go through and also come up with an initial strategy that we need to be able to be iterated over as we go, as we continue with the project. Next slide, please. And so the way that we have done this is first by collecting available resources from the community. I started this project earlier this year. And so as of 2020, February 2020, that was the time frame when we were collecting the available resources from the community on FAIR. And at that time, they were at least these 5 different efforts or different activities that we know of that were providing checks that are based on the FAIR principles. And hopefully you're all familiar with these checks, so I won't go into them in detail, but if you need more information, please let me know. But in any case, the key characteristic that is shared among these different 5 sets of checks is that they were all really new, and they are, in some cases, some of them are still being implemented at the time that we were looking at these different checks. So it was really difficult for us to try to apply all of them to the to our pilot data sets, and also it would be impossible for us to try to do it in one go, since there are more than 120 checks in total. And so what we did was that we decided to do a high-level crosswalk among all these different 5 sets, so that we can actually understand what are some of the unique checks that would be would result from combining these different 5 checks. And once we have done that, we saw that there are actually a more manageable subset of unique checks. And again, the key here is that some of these checks don't have very mature or very clear definitions. So we definitely saw that it was very helpful for us to think about how we would apply these checks with USGS context. And then that's how we consolidated the different checks. And so you can see here a quick summary of the number of unique checks that we consider from consolidating these different 5 checks. And then once we have this set of more manageable checks, then we were able to take these checks and apply to the sample data sets from the USGS. Next slide, please. And so since the project is still in progress, as I mentioned, so I can only give you some preliminary results along with some of the challenges that we have encountered. But also, this is again highlighting why working with the community like IQC and the data information quality cluster has been really helpful for us in considering what we are doing and how we are going to move forward. Next slide, please. So the preliminary results so far is that based on our understanding of these checks, we were actually quite fair. As you can see the statistics here, out of the subset of the more than 120 checks from these different activities, we see more than 50% of our quote unquote compliance or our readiness to meet the FAIR performance. However, the caveat here is the key caveat here is definitely because of the newness of these resources, and we have to kind of adapt these checks to our environment. We might or might not be understanding or interpreting these checks according to the original organizers or the groups that came out with these checks, how they envision the checks should be implemented. And so sure, thanks. There's definitely going to be discussions there. But of course, also the focus of the assessment, metadata versus data. We decided to do data first, but we definitely need to go back to look at data. And finally, the methodology. We know that FAIR principles have been talked about in terms of being more machine focused. But in our case, we started with the qualitative information so we can understand the quality information from the human standpoint. We definitely have next steps to scale up and iterate, and we definitely want to continue our effort with our community so that, again, as I mentioned in the key takeaway, that we can converge with the community's best practices. So I think the last slide is just to recognize my team at USGS and a couple individuals specifically from the team that I've worked with. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sophie. So now is our question time. Rama, have you observed any questions from the audience?
Yes, there are a number of questions.
Please go ahead.
So Yashin, if you stop sharing, I will share the my screen that has a question. Rama, do you want me to share screen, or you want to do that? Okay. Please
go ahead. And the questions are all in the Kiko chat Google Doc already. So I don't see any new questions in the Zoom chat. So Peng, you can tell me when we are running out of time, or when we have a minute or something like that.
Yeah, okay. I'll run.
Okay, the first question is for Marie from Ivana. So the question is, have you used any international standards for formulating data quality strategy? And if so, what was your experience with adopting these standards?
We did not follow such standards, ISO norms, or we invented a new one for operational oceanography based on the work of an operational oceanography community called Godet Ocean Predict. And we did follow, I think, the way the project management and the way quality is ensured in space projects. So we tried to follow the same type of project management and quality assurance. But yes, no, it's not ISO or this type of standards that we use. It's a different one. But we try to adopt some standards that are also used in a larger community. Okay. So it's not that we invented one called Ocean Predict, but it's we invented one in this group, Godet Ocean Predict community.
Okay. Yeah, I've tried to capture some of what you said. If
sorry, my English
that's
is
okay. No, your English is
end
not
of the day English.
No, not at all. But it's my ability to capture quickly. So if you could go ahead and edit on the Kiko chat.
Okay, I will edit maybe.
Yeah, okay. So the next one, I think you already entered your answer to Dave Jones. Mm-hmm. So the question was, have you looked at identifying anything like operational readiness levels for users, etc.? Mm-hmm. And so I believe you said this is something we try to develop through key performance indicators or KPIs, but we'll study if we can improve the way we present the operational readiness information. And this group is very helpful. Okay. So the next question is also for Marie from Rob Crystal Ornelas. I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly. So it says, when you said your users request expanded documentation, is this focused on documentation about data quality? Are you referring to increasing the type of documents under the document tab on the Copernicus website and other resources?
I was talking mostly about the quality documents, and not really to expand them, but to make them more focused, to have maybe three short documents and focused, rather than one very big document where you can find everything. So to help the user find the information they need.
Okay. Does Rob have any follow-on to that answer?
No, just thank you for clarifying. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks. So the next one is for Sarah from Dave Jones. Are there plans to provide the data sets referenced in the climate assessments as web services so they can be rapidly accessed and shared across collaborators, decision makers, or the media? This will provide great information immediately available to those who want to combine the reference data with current information to highlight changes, etc. So
Yes.
Sarah, yeah.
Yes, I'm happy to answer that. It's hard to provide a complete picture or demonstrate or demo our whole suite of tools and services with the assessment, but the good news is that we actually do provide this already in part. So those data sets that were derived specifically for analysis for the assessment science, we provide direct access to those data sets through our interactive metadata viewer. I very quickly mentioned that in my slides. On any of the assessment report websites, those are the sites that release the report to the public, each figure has the option to view the metadata through our interactive viewer. That includes a way to kind of experience all of the collected information for a figure panel, but we also provide the opportunity to download the entire record of metadata for that figure, both in plain language and JSON. And then those derived data sets would be linked directly to the data themselves in that viewer. For those data sets that we are citing, they may be federal or not, we provide direct access to those data sets to their hosting agency or publishing agency via their direct landing page, and all of that is accessible through the viewer. So hopefully that answers your question. I did want to circle back to the first question that Marie answered. I think it said if all of the presenters might be able to answer. What we do provide in that viewer is framed by the ISO 19115 standard. So it is consistent across every figure in all of the viewers to answer those required pieces of documentation. And what's challenging about that is that specifically tends to apply to data sets, and we are applying it to more than data set information. Also the sources for adapted and directly cited content, as well as analysis and visualization methods. So there's some challenges with that, but all of that is accessible through our interactive viewer that anyone from the public is interested in accessing. And we actually do have some really great examples of media and others accessing that exact information in the viewer for specifically tailoring it for their uses. My favorite one to reference is National Public Radio, who was very interested in taking the data and the methods out of one figure's metadata and creating their own tailored product for their very regionalized audience. So please let me know if you have trouble locating that in any of the report websites. I'd be happy to walk you through it.
Thank you, Sarah. Rama, we are past 1 minute.
Oh, okay.
Perhaps have
So one more
remainder
question.
with 1 or 2 questions for Sophie.
Yeah. So let's do one question from Yashing to Sophie. One check for FAIR is metadata are released with a clear and accessible data usage license. What's your observation on this item through your pilot study? So Sophie.
Sure, thanks, Rama. And Yashing, for in terms of the clear and accessible data usage license, in our assessment, or at least in the preliminary assessment, we actually broke that up into 2 areas. The first, well, 2 segments, I should say. The first is the clear part, and then the accessible part. Because for the clear part, for USGS data, it's actually quite straightforward. USGS data is in the public domain. So we don't really have any specific requirement or any kind of restrictions. But in terms of accessible, that's something that we definitely need to understand from the community or from the checks a little bit more, because my experience so far is that the accessible might need to be harvestable or machine accessible, not just in terms of accessible by a human. So I would, at the very, very top level, we would say that the accessible part is very compliant, or we have achieved that for the humans. But if we are including the machine or the harvesting part of it, that is something definitely we will need to quantify a little bit separately. Payne, I know you've said that we only have 1 minute, but there are two questions that are kind of related, and I kind of want to talk about really quickly. So from Joan, the crosswalk and whether or not I can share with that, we would definitely consider sharing that with the community. So I don't know if Joan has my contact information, but if people want to get in touch, we can definitely talk about that. And a related question from Danny. Danny asked me whether or not there are checks that were specific to data quality. And so Danny, for this question, it's a little bit difficult for me to explain by text, and that's why I didn't reply in the chat. Basically, when I consolidated the checks from the 5 different sets, whatever the checks that are from these different sets refer to data quality, then I would consider that to be data quality. So these checks did not specifically talk about sample or instrument errors or things like that. So the short answer for your question would be no, we didn't use any of data specific checks, but the longer answer is probably the fields that I actually checked in order to apply the unique checks to the data. So I know this is a bit vague because I'm short on time, but Danny, if you want to talk about this some more, I will be definitely happy to share more information about my methodology and my process. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry we're short on time, but if the speakers could review the notes and edit it as appropriate, and if there are any missing questions that you have not answered, please go ahead and type the answers in so it'll be there for the record. And thank you all.
And we could continue offline in this documentation for discussion. And if you would prefer or don't mind putting your email, then people can reach out to you among each others. Thank you for all the presenters for the excellent presentations, and Yashin and Rama facilitating the presentation and question. Again, please continue to discuss in the notes offline. So the next segment will be led by Bob Downs, and we're opening up for the open discussion. And Bob has put together some of the questions to get started. Bob, you want me to run the slides, and you go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Sure, yes. Thank you very much, Peng. And so what we're doing now is we're shifting gears a little bit, and you might recall that the workshop is facilitating the process of developing guidelines for curating and representing fair data set quality information. So what we would like to do now is to move towards the planning process for those guidelines. And in doing that, I think it's important to first discuss the potential audience that we might talk about. Then following that, we should talk about the scope for the guidelines, or even in conjunction with the audience, if you will. And then its applicability, and following that, what we should do in terms of the publication of the guidelines and our general approach. So starting out with the audience, let me pose the question, should the audience be one or more of the following groups? Or even other groups, such as data producers, data stewards, data curators, data center managers. And then in conjunction with that, we want to also think about whether the guidelines should be targeted to early career or experienced researchers or some mix in that. That is, should there be some kind of a prerequisite information needed in order to understand the guidelines, or maybe the guidelines should have some kind of preliminary information contained within them. So if we could start out talking about the audience, maybe that will help us to start thinking more about the scope of the guidelines. So if anyone has any ideas or suggestions for how we might want to focus on a particular audience, or even to make it even more general to a broader audience, we would certainly welcome any comments that others might offer. Does anyone want to offer suggestions for the audience? You could unmute yourself, I guess. Okay, I don't hear any suggestions.
Well, yeah, this is Rama. Since nobody else has said anything, let me say something here. In the information quality cluster, we have always been talking about the multidimensional aspects of data quality. And that seems to nicely fit the set of groups that you have identified in the audience. So we talk about scientific quality, product quality, stewardship quality, and service quality. And so the guidelines could be grouped into that and can address the different audiences that you're talking about. Maybe somebody else has additional things to say.
Yeah, I actually saw a comment in the chat from Castile, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And that's to add funders to the audience, because they could use the information when they're reviewing grants to data repositories or to data providers. So yeah, I think that's a great suggestion from Castile. And so I certainly think we should add that as well as Rama's suggestions. Any other thoughts on the audience?
You can unmute yourself to speak or enter your comments in the notes.
Okay, well, while people are thinking about that, let's move on to the scope since we're kind of short of time. I'm just trying to make my screen bigger here. Yeah, if we could go back one slide, Peng, please. Oh, thank you. So in terms of the scope, how might we organize the guidelines? That is, we could take a data lifecycle approach, or we could look at different issues and provide them in some order, which either could be within a data lifecycle approach or some other order, simplicity to complexity or something. And related to that, what sections, topics, and issues should be included? So obviously we need to know what sections or topics or issues we're going to have in order to determine how they would be organized. And then relatedly, we might want to think about whether we should have this as a single document or a series of documents that are each focusing on a particular facet. So I know this is very broad, all of these questions, but it's important for us to identify the scope of where we're going to begin the planning process. Otherwise, we won't have any direction. So Any ideas or suggestions that we might get from you, the participants in this process would really be great.
Bob,
Yes.
I'm wondering whether I should talk a little bit about the outcomes, the workshop, and we can go back to some of the questions here and before we finish.
That's a great idea, Peng.
Okay, where people are thinking about it. So what I'm going to do is to show the next slides that just to give the people a couple minutes to think about in terms of some of the open questions. And I will talk about some preliminary outcomes from the workshops that probably would serve as some background when you're thinking about it. So please put your comments into chat or in the note. Okay, so let me start. I'm going to turn off the timer here. So we had a lot of discussions and during the breakout and during the questions for presentations, and I have listed some of the takeaways, and there's no way cover all the aspects, but some of the main parts I think that kind of relative to the developing the guidelines. And there's definitely a need for organizations to ensure the quality, whether you are producing data sets or you manage data sets or provide data or services. And there's also a strong need for defining common terminologies and a community profile. And then the comments mentioned that it is very valuable to reference best practices and that enabling human understandings as well as enabling machine capabilities of quality assessment. And it mentioned that the approach should be scalable and preferable with the automated process. And it has indicated by participants that it should be applicable not just for not only 2 observations, then should also be applicable to model data. And it emphasized that documentation that supports self-assessment should also be provided along with assessment for transparency. And that it has noticed by the participants that there are a lot of approaches for various different purposes. They are need to have machine readable metadata and for the data quality or maturity of metadata content. And then it has indicate that it was discovered how complex the concept quality is. But the comment has been made that if we break into logical pieces, it will have some hope of being tractable. And of course, we need to collaborate on guidelines. And we also need to differentiation among different types users and guidelines. And it has indicated that guidelines should be offered by data stores and repositories for users to contribute to assessment as well. And it also mentioned that we need to organize more workshops like this one. I mean, the pre-ESIP workshop. And in the next several slides, and I'm going to go over some of the preliminary outcomes, and particularly those are from the pollings, and the participation participates is how many counts is representing by the green one at the bottom. And for the first one, it's 100% participate agree that data set quality management is a multidimensional problem. And 70% participated in the polling indicate that it is not possible to have one dataset quality assessment model for all intended purpose and needs. And 24% not sure, 6% says yes. For whether transparency and quantifiable quality assessment should be part of a dataset quality management framework, 88% participate said yes, and 12% says not sure. And when asked if the approach that used to evaluate whether it's checks or maturity metrics and should be findable and accessible and preferable, be interoperable and reusable, 83% says yes, 11% says not sure, and 6% no. And when asked if the assessment result, the dataset quality information should be findable and accessible, interoperable, and usable, also known as fair, 90% says yes, 6% not sure, 3% no. So I think that's the a quick summary, some of the preliminary result, and we're going to go back to the open question. Hopefully that helps put some context into the open discussion and question. And Bob, are you ready to take over? Let's see, maybe for another 10 minutes also?
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you very much, Peng. That was really helpful. I think that will give everybody some ideas in terms of the scope, especially for the guidelines. And in particular, looking at the results of those polls, the identification of it being important to be a multi-dimensional problem, or to take a multi-dimensional perspective at the problem, makes a lot of sense. And so that should certainly inform our thoughts about the scope of the guidelines. Likewise, seeing that a lot of people thought that the quality assessment framework should be both transparent and quantifiable, I think also provides us with some insight in terms of how we might organize the guidelines, but also in terms of the types of sections, topics, and issues that are included in it. Maybe it's simpler to first ask the question, should we plan for just a single document, or should we try to have a series of documents that perhaps are even released over time? Any thoughts on that? Well, not hearing anything on that, and please feel free to unmute yourself if you have a suggestion. Let's go back to the sections, topics, and issues. Are there any particular issues that people think should be covered, and appropriately any sections that they might be included within?
Hey, Bob.
Yes, Dave.
Hey, Bob. Yeah, this is Dave. I just wanted to, I was thinking as you were talking and everyone else was talking, when Ping was talking as well, that maybe as we work on data quality issues, like we've been doing within the Disaster Lifecycle Cluster and in the All Hazards Consortium, is thinking about use cases and maybe identifying some particular use cases for some NOAA data that might be, curated and quality controlled and made available, and then kind of gauging the impact that data has on decision making in a couple different use cases to see how the data quality question might be answered from a user's perspective. Because ultimately what I'm trying to do is link the data quality effort here together with the operational readiness levels. So it would be nice eventually to have some sort of, conversion algorithm that takes all of NOAA's data quality scores or metadata and incorporates it into the ORL levels so we can have immediate correlation between them. Does that make sense?
Yes, especially the idea of taking the user's perspective. As you know, I'm always a strong advocate of the users. After all, that's why we're doing all this. And so if we could develop use cases and then look at those particularly from a user's perspective, I think that would be really helpful. Also, if we could, as you said, look at some of these processes like NOAA's and others and see how those might apply and how we might be able to frame these issues based on what we learn from what NOAA and other organizations are doing. So yeah, that's great, Dave.
Okay, thank you.
Bob, this is Danny. I just want to, I would echo Dave's decision to start with use cases. I think that's always a great approach to frame any project that you're undertaking. I have trepidation to comment just because I'm so new to this particular effort and I don't want to sort of drag everyone backwards, but at the risk of doing so, I have a quick question that might be a really straightforward answer on your behalf. So when applying the assessment, this would happen at a repository level or a data curation facility. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think that we would want to see a variety of organizations adopting this, but I could see, for instance, somebody previously mentioned funders adopting it, but I also could see data producers using this kind of information to improve the quality of their data as they're preparing it for submission to a particular data repository for curation. And likewise, even the users themselves, I think, could gain here because the users can play a major role in data quality in terms of their use of the data and determining its applicability or its inapplicability to particular types of uses or studies. So I see that each of these different audiences could find value in these, but certainly we would want the data facilities to be taking a major role to facilitate a lot of this.
Great. Yeah. I think I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying. I envision this as a tool for repositories, but certainly pushing it forward for data submitters, and even I think it would facilitate a dialogue to improve data quality if the end users or the data submitters can see these types of assessments on full data sets. I think it's also, as Gastel said, something that the funders would be highly interested in a compliance sort of, a compliance scenario in terms of data improvement of their federally funded research output. So I agree with all the statements. I think I could come up with, just hypothetical scenarios that would follow along what you're saying. And so from the very broadest sense, going back to that audience, I think you were starting to coalesce around that, and Gastel added a great additional stakeholder there.
Yeah.
And I would just add on too that in terms of your early career versus senior career researcher, I would think that anybody that's producing the data sets would be a target audience there, regardless of what career stage they are.
Surely. And so I think to that, we might want to make sure that we are, if we're introducing any terminology or language that might not be familiar to early career people, that we are sure to define those terms right up front, and as well as having a section where people can go and look up particular terms that they might have been introduced to, but then forgot in the course of their reading. So yeah, I think that's a great idea, Danny. Thank you for sharing that. And I also saw another comment in the chat from Heather Brown, saying that she is seconding this thought about creating a dialogue in an iterative process. And so we certainly appreciate that, because, yeah, it's data quality is not something that stops at one point with either the design of the study or the instruments or the submission of the data or the curation of the data or the dissemination of the data or the use. All of these things are important throughout the entire data life cycle, and sharing information amongst the parties would certainly help move this forward.
Bob,
yeah.
sorry, 1 minute.
Okay, so let's quickly just go to the last, the next slide there. Yes, so regarding the publication process, should we just have these endorsed and released as ESIP guidelines, perhaps on the ESIP Commons or the publishing platform that ESIP's using? Or should we consider having these published as a journal article or a book with chapters? And then also, please, any comments that people might share about the particular approach. That is, should we have a initial review, or should this be an analytical approach, or should we just take a prescriptive approach, or perhaps all of these? Dave mentioned use cases, and that's a great idea. Should we have other kinds of examples? And should we offer recurrent patterns? That is, should we perhaps have like an ongoing case study or scenario or problem that we're presenting throughout the entire guidelines in order to keep people focused on different perspectives on a particular case or scenario. So anyway, these are all things to think about, and we would certainly welcome any thoughts that any of you might share with us.
Bob, this is
Yes.
Sophie. Do we still have time, Payne, for me just to make a quick comment?
Yes, go ahead. We are short of time.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead if you have a quick
sorry,
comment.
I'll make it quick. I just want to say, coming off Danny's comment and Gastel's comment about different roles and use case, and just thinking about the questions that you have, I think and also Payne, based on my influence of your data stewardship maturity matrix, in terms of the approach, I definitely would welcome an ESIP guideline kind of approach. And with explanations of how to apply things or how to use things, and basically making sure this is a actionable document instead of more of a reference or more of a text. So I think about books with chapters to be a bit heavy or less actionable. Maybe that's just my connotation, but I would really love to see how this document becomes more applicable side of it instead of a theoretical side of things. Thank you.
Thank you. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. However, please enter your comments and suggestions in the notes, and we'll definitely go over them and make them use them as a reference. And so the moving forward, here are some of the timelines, and we will be summarize the outcomes for ESIP workshop in August, and that probably would published as a figure share as a report, and we'll continue collect community input until middle of October. Then when we'll start to consolidate by the organizing committee, and most of them are co-chairs here today. And the plan is to have a guideline completed, a draft completed, ready for review by various stakeholders and the teams, and potentially later on for a wide ESIP-wide review. And the current plan is to have the guidelines document baselined in June 2021. So again, I'm going to, there's a lot of can be done in terms of data sets, quality information, and we do want to narrow the scope of the community guidelines, given how much we can do and we can actually able to accomplish in the time frame. And the guideline will be for curating and representing data set quality information that is consistent, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And we'll try to define the common terminology and potentially identify necessary ingredients. If somebody to start data in an operational environment, what are the ingredients one need to curate and representing data quality information. However, this guideline will not be for how to curate and represent data quality information. There are just too much nuances there, and there's no standard practice and approaches to address every aspect of data set quality information. Although they are very important, should be done, but we don't feel like we can accomplish that. And then gets to back to the question in terms of how can you get involved. We want these guidelines to be for the community, by the community, and there's a number of ways you can get involved. One, of course, is participate in the development of the guidelines. And if your task responsibility prevents you from doing that, you can also to review the draft. And the third part is, you can always stay informed the outcomes and issues, and if along the whole process of development. And you can contact any one of the co-lead of this particular effort, me at the GPAIN at ncastate.edu, and Carlos, he's from EU side, and we have Arvina from the Australia side. So any of the co-chairs will be able to get you involved in any different ways. And I am actually maintaining a mailing list. So if you want to be stay informed of the updates in terms of the progress and accomplishment, and please send me email. I will put you on the mailing list. And here, the emphasize it is only when we work together, we'll be able to accomplish this one that will be relevant for the community. And so with time limit, we are not able to go through all the questions for presentation as well as for Bob's open discussion. And however, please use the notes and to continue to enter your comments. And I believe the notes will be open until Friday. So you'll have, if you have a time tomorrow or Friday to do so. In the rest of the 5 minutes also before I closing, and I will hand over the mic to David to work on the 3 takeaways from this session. David, do you want to share your screen? You want me just share my screen?
Yeah, I can share my screen. That's fine.
Okay, I'll start sharing. You go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, so if you scroll down to the 3 takeaways section, first of all, can everybody hear me okay? Just want to confirm if everybody can hear me.
Yes.
Excellent. We can hear you fine.
Thank you. All right, so Bob covered a really broad set of questions, which I think really is a good segue into this 3 takeaway section. I have some seeds that I've planted from the workshop that we had last week in terms of some drafted statements of some takeaways. But because of the more updated information we have collected today, I think there's definitely room to expand that and refine that. But I thought we could have some seed questions to consider as we think about our 3 takeaways here. First, where do we go from here? It sounds like Peng laid a great timeline of where we're going to go from here, at least in the next year or so. But then beyond that point, where do we go? How broad should our scope be? Bob kind of touched on that, and I think that others have chimed in, which is great to see. In this current effort, we've identified and engaged, I would say, a number of cross-domain stakeholders, and also within the cross-agency realms and international realms. But is this enough? And who are we missing? So we touched on potentially one thing that we may have been missing was reaching out to funders, which is great, and also thinking about the target audience that the guidelines will be produced for. I think is key here. Danny Kincaid touched on the need to have identifying perhaps career levels where people are at currently in their career could be helpful and relevant to this as well. Next is this a sustainable effort for the long term? If so, how do we keep it sustained? I look back to Sophie's point about is this just going to be a reference document, or is this something that's going to be actionable? If it's actionable, how do we sustain this? So I think it was pretty clear in the ESIP workshop that there could potentially be a role that the information quality cluster could play, although I don't think we had enough time to really flesh out what that would look like in terms of a sustaining role for this. And so I don't know if we want to necessarily commit to that at this point, but at the same time, we do have a way of facilitating engagement in these types of efforts. And how do we keep it sustained? So that's I think key to think about. What are sort of the mechanisms that we can leverage to do that? And also, what principles and capabilities are critical to the success of this initiative? So one of the key ones I would say is probably the FAIR data principles. We touched quite a bit on that, more so I would say in the pre-ESIP workshop than we did this time around. With that in mind, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to go quickly into a draft that I've put together of the key takeaways, and others are welcome to put their feedback into the Zoom chat. And if we have time, we can maybe iterate some of these. But just be mindful, this is just a draft. So the first is the need to have commonly defined terminology and community vetted profiles / guidelines for data quality information, as well as a coordinated approach to publishing these guidelines. I think that's one of the things that Bob touched on is and maybe even with Peng's timeline, we're going to publish, but where do we publish? We need to have a targeted publisher that we're going to look toward, and in making sure that we have a coordinated approach. So Peng touched on how there's a mailing list to be part of that communication loop as we move forward. Also defining approaches and best practices, and making sure that these follow the FAIR principles, ensuring that these are scalable and support automation with cross-domain support for earth science data, such as accommodating observational and model data. Lastly, there's the need to have continued community collaboration, interoperability, machine-readable metadata, enabling both usability and understandability, and sufficient guidance documentation, and kind of thinking of these as basically the critical foundations that we would need to reach and support to reach that level that we need in our common endeavor to advocate for enhancing data quality information. So yeah, it kind of continues in a broken sentence in the next page here, as you can see. But yeah, so that's kind of my remarks here, my thoughts on that, and then just kind of based on both today's, as well as I would say the most of it was the 2-session pre-ESIP workshop that we had as well, feeding into this. So with that, I'll turn it back to Peng.
Thank you. So this session is come to conclusion, and I'd like to thank all my co-chairs and the presenters, and as well as everybody who has participated in this session. And again, please feel free to continue the conversation in the Kiko chat notes, and let me participate as much as you could this community effort. And with that, I'd like to say bye to everybody.
Thank you, Peng.
Thank you, Peng. Thanks for leading this effort. Looking forward for future discussion.
Thank you, Peng.
Thank you. Great
everyone.
session, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Peng.
Thanks, Peng and all. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Peng. We'll see you another time.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. Bye for now.